Good afternoon, and welcome to the Foundation Fighting Blindness Insights Forum call. I'm Chris Adams, the Vice President of Marketing and Communications at the Foundation. We appreciate everyone joining us for today's forum. I would like to briefly review some logistical details for the call. Currently, all participant lines are in listen-only mode with no video. Today's conference is being recorded and is also a closed caption. To activate the closed captioning, please select the closed captioning option located at the bottom of the Zoom interface. Please note that today's event does not have any slides. Our speakers do have their videos live, however, all their comments will be purely in audio format. If you are using a screen reader, please be aware that the controls are at the bottom of the Zoom interface. This control bar may collapse when it's not in use. If you prefer to prevent the controls from auto-hiding, go to the settings within the Zoom platform, select accessibility, and then select always show meeting controls. It might be helpful to maximize your window and navigate by using the tab key. Additional buttons and settings are also available by pressing the Alt key. During the call, you may ask questions through the Q&A and chat features, or by sending an email to info@fightingblindness.org. We will address all questions toward the end of the call during the Q&A session, at which time additional instructions for asking questions will be provided. At this time, I'd like to turn the call over to Jason Menzo.
Very good. Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We've got a very exciting call planned. My name is Jason Menzo, and I am the Chief Operating Officer here at the Foundation Fighting Blindness. I'd like to welcome you all to our quarterly Insights Forum call, which is focused on highlighting the latest developments here at the Foundation Fighting Blindness and the broader inherited retinal disease community. On today's call, I will be highlighting some of our recent activities in the community, including an update on our recent events. And I will also be providing a brief summary of our current financial performance. I'm also very pleased to have Dr. Todd Durham joining us today. Todd is our Vice President of Clinical and Outcomes Research, and he joined the Foundation in early 2019 in a new role that is focused on clinical research, such as natural history studies and the development of novel endpoints for inherited retinal diseases. Todd has been a great addition to our team, bringing strong expertise in biotechnology and drug development, as well as clinical trial design. He is going to be providing an overview of our initiatives related to natural history studies today. And we often get questions from our community about the purpose or the funding or the outcomes of these types of studies. And we thought it'd be a good idea today to give a forum for Todd to be able to explain some of the context around our efforts and what natural history studies are and why they're so important to help us meet our mission. Then our CEO, Dr. Ben Yerxa, will wrap up our formal comments by highlighting our key accomplishments over the past financial year and positioning us for the year ahead. Finally, following our formal remarks, we will be joined by Dr. Brian Mansfield, our EVP of Research and Interim Chief Scientific Officer, who will be available to answer questions during our Q&A session. And at that time, Chris will provide instructions on how to ask questions. As Chris mentioned a minute ago, this call is being closed captioned, and a replay and fully accessible transcript of this call will be available on our website in the weeks ahead. If you have any feedback related to accessibility or other suggestions for this call, or really for the Foundation in general, please reach out to us at the email address info@fightingblindness.org. So now let's start with a snapshot of recent activities from the past few months and what's coming up here at the Foundation. First off, let's talk about Visions 2020, which quickly became Virtual Visions 2020 and a totally virtual event that we hosted at the end of June. Visions is our global conference that takes place every other year and brings together our global inherited retinal disease community. And I must say our community truly embraced the virtual platform for the conference this year, which led to significantly higher participation than we've ever seen before. We had more than 1,500 international participants registered from 45 different countries. Plus, we streamed all the sessions on Facebook Live and on our website, to an even bigger audience. Our attendees joined us from all over the globe, spanning from Australia to Chile to the Netherlands, Ukraine, Egypt, Nigeria, from Iran to India, from Japan to Singapore. We truly had global participation in this event, and it was spectacular. And as an example, our opening session, which featured our CEO, Dr. Ben Yerxa, and a leading researcher from the University of Florida, Dr. Shannon Boy, they kicked off the conference with nearly 4,000 people viewing the session on Facebook Live, on our Facebook Live stream alone. This speaks to the global nature of our mission and the thousands who have affinity to what we do. The conference had an impressive array of topics and speakers, such as advancing cell therapies, the promise of genetic therapies, a session on mental health and isolation, which is important in our current environment. And we even hosted breakout sessions to create a space for peer-to-peer dialogue in a social setting, along with our typical research updates on retinitis pigmentosa, Usher syndrome, LCA, Stargardt's, and age-related macular degeneration. Overall, we were thrilled to see such a high level of engagement, both from the US and internationally. And we look forward to our next visions, which hopefully will be in person, and it's scheduled for the summer of 2022 in Disney World in Florida. And of course, there'll be more information about that in the months ahead. And one final reminder as it relates to visions, audio and video replays for all of the Visions 2020 sessions are available at no charge on our website and can be accessed at www.fightingblindness.org under the events section. So now let's move on to another key community focus for the foundation, our Vision Walk program. In the fall of 2019, we hosted 17 different Vision Walks across the country and raised approximately $2 million towards our mission in those 17 walks alone. For the remaining 19 walks that were scheduled to take place from this past April through June 2020, as you would imagine, we had to pivot, and we did. We shifted our approach and combined them all into one national virtual Vision Walk day that was held on June 6, 2020. Again, we were humbled by the commitment and support that our community generated, and these spring virtual Vision Walks raised more than $1.3 million towards our mission. So, you know, it's important context to keep in mind that $1.3 million is an impressive number, but it is only half of the revenue that we would typically expect to see for this slate of Vision Walks in the spring. However, on a percentage basis, it does outperform many of our peer organizations who have also pivoted to the virtual platform and virtual walks from this past spring. It's important to note that the COVID pandemic has certainly impacted our fundraising, and it's forcing us to be creative as we go forward. That said, I do want to highlight and thank our community as a whole, including our staff, our board members, our trustees, our committees and volunteers, our chapters, and all the team captives from across the country who've really stepped it up to help us keep our mission moving forward despite the challenges that we've been facing. And I think it's important as we look to the months ahead that we continue to galvanize as a community to help us, because the environment unfortunately doesn't look like it's going to improve, at least for several more months. So I want to thank you, but also continue to ask for your support. Building off the experience that we had this spring, we're very excited to announce our fall National Virtual Vision Walk, which is scheduled for Saturday, October 24th, 2020. And so much like we did in the spring, we have a fun and exciting day planned as we celebrate our fundraising efforts towards our mission. And associated with that, we will be hosting an informational kickoff session on Thursday, August 27th at 8:00 p.m. Eastern with logistics and tips on fundraising for team captains and participants in the Vision Walk program. You can find out more information and sign up to participate on our website homepage in the Get Involved section under Vision Walk. And much more information about the kickoff and Vision Walk will be sent via email and be posted on our social media pages in the weeks ahead. And while most of our originally planned fundraisers, like our dinner galas and our golf tournaments and other events from the summer and fall have been postponed or canceled, we do have a very exciting upcoming virtual event that I want to share with you, and it's going to be open to everyone. We're really excited and thrilled to be announcing this today. We're going to present a unique one-night-only live-streamed concert and conversation with Sam and Casey Harris of the rock band X-Ambassadors. And you may know X-Ambassadors. They're a popular American rock band from Ithaca, New York. They've had 5 Billboard Top 50 hits in recent years, including songs that many of you know, including Renegades and Unsteady. The band has a personal connection to our mission, with keyboard player and founding member Casey Harris being blind from a rare genetic condition called senior Loken syndrome, causing him to be visually impaired from birth. In the live stream, Casey and his brother Sam Harris, who's the lead singer and songwriter for the band, will perform an acoustic set of their top hits. And I'll have an opportunity to have a conversation with them to discuss their connection to our mission. And it's really a fascinating and inspiring discussion that puts a personal face on one of the more prolific musicians and groups from our community. The event is being produced with our friends from Two Blind Brothers, the clothing company founded by Bradford and Brian Manning, who donate 100% of their proceeds to retinal research. And it really does promise to be a huge event for us, where we're hopefully going to introduce our mission to a whole new broad audience of folks out in the community. And we are very excited to be bringing it to you live in just a couple weeks. We will be announcing the date and promoting the event in the next couple days, so please stay tuned. And we will be, of course, emailing and posting it on social media and having a lot of awareness. But I am going to ask all of you to please share the date with your friends and try to get as many folks to participate and watch this live stream as possible. It will be free of charge, but we will be accepting donations, and hopefully we can raise some money for our mission as part of this event as well. Shifting gears, there's also been a number of educational events that the foundation and our professional outreach team have hosted virtually over the last few months. We hosted a series of vision seminars and chapter speaker webinars that have attracted more than 800 attendees. In May, we hosted the Foundation's first ever continuing education webinar for eye care professionals, where Dr. Jackie Duncan, who chairs our scientific advisory board, provided an overview of inherited retinal diseases, genetic testing, and clinical trials to more than 200 eye care professionals, many of whom were new to the Foundation. And the recorded webinar is also available on our website and continues to be promoted to the professional eye care audience and will for the rest of this year. In June, we also hosted a genetic testing webinar workshop for eye care professionals with our partners at Blueprint Genetics and Informed DNA. The replay of this webinar is available at no charge to anyone who's interested in learning more about genetic testing and genetic counseling, and can be found on our website in the genetic testing section under the eye care professional section. And please note, you don't have to be an eye care professional to listen or appreciate the information within these replays. In fiscal year 2021, our professional outreach team is planning to participate in multiple virtual industry conferences and host additional continuing educational courses and online webinars to maintain and grow our relationships, especially with the large eye care practices in high metropolitan areas. And we are also pursuing partnerships with biotech and pharmaceutical companies to expand our network and expand our reach. Now let me provide a few highlights of our recent marketing and awareness building activities. We have been working hard to increase interactions with community members and add additional content to our digital platforms. We have expanded the amount of content, including more personal stories, resources for the current COVID-19 pandemic, research news, and sharing content from all of our other partners. And all of this content is new and available on our website. And if you haven't gotten the theme from the first part of this call yet, our website is a great resource at fightingblindness.org and is constantly being updated with new content and new information. And so we want it to be a resource available to our community. And I recommend checking back at our website every couple of weeks, because there's always a new story, there's always new research news, and it's a great place to stay up to date with what's happening in our community. And in particular, I encourage you to read some of the personal stories, which we refer to as our beacon stories, which are inspiring stories and uplifting stories about individuals from within our community and their personal journey, focusing on how their drive fuels them to pursue their passions. And these beacon stories are found under the newly diagnosed testing section of our website. Our marketing team has also been focusing on optimizing the website to increase traffic from search engines like Google. And today, you'll find that the foundation shows up on page 1 for pretty much every search result on Google for keywords that are relevant for our mission. And that wasn't always the case. So our team has worked really hard. So when someone searches retinitis pigmentosa or genetic testing for inherited retinal disease, that our website shows up as one of the first results when people Google, which is a really important endeavor to expand awareness of our mission and of our foundation and the resources that are available on our website to the community. In the past year alone, we have revamped our educational collateral. We've launched our beacon stories, which I just mentioned. We launched our public service advertising campaign, which we've spoken about in previous calls. And all in all, I think it's safe to say we've been very busy trying to get the word out and highlight our mission to the broad community. Finally, I'm going to conclude my remarks with a brief summary of our current financial position and performance. And as a reminder, the Foundation Fighting Blindness operates on a fiscal year that runs from July through June. So we just completed our fiscal year 2020 on June 30th. And our staff is working really hard to close the financials from this fiscal year, which, as you would imagine, is unlike any year we've ever experienced before with what's happening in the world today. The audited financial statements will be available later this fall and will be accessible from our website, again, on the homepage in the About Us section under Financial Reporting. We are able to share with you today the preliminary financial results for the fiscal year 2020, keeping in mind that these are just projections, and as the fiscal year closes officially and the audit is completed, we'll have those final results later in the fall. Our current projections for the year include estimated total revenue of $36 million, which includes $5.1 million in investment income and a new $15 million gift specifically for the RD fund, which Ben will highlight later in the call today. Traditional annual fundraising, however, are projected to be significantly below our budget, in large part due to the coronavirus pandemic. This revenue is against operating expenses of $14.3 million, which includes public health and education along with other expenses. And we have been able to be very efficient and come in about $1 million below budget on expenses. The net result is that we project the organization to be able to support about $7 million in new research coming off of our performance this past year. And I'm really proud to share that with the prudent financial management that we've been managing the organization under, we were able to award the full funds anticipated prior to the pandemic. We were able to fund all of our prior research grant and award commitments and continue to fund new research commitments that Ben will again highlight later in the call. As we look to 2021 and kick off our new fiscal year, our staff has continued to collaborate on ways to increase impact, to be as efficient as possible with the tightening resources that we expect. We have worked with our board to establish a fiscal year 2021 budget that includes funding all sorts of new research in accordance with our 5-year strategic plan. The key to the foundation's sustainability and success is the commitment of community members like you. Your contributions in time, in talent, and the resources that you provide us are essential in enabling us to continue funding critical research even during these challenging times. And on behalf of the entire foundation, I can't thank you enough for your continued support. So that concludes my section of the call today. I'd like to turn the call over to Dr. Todd Durham, who I mentioned a minute ago is new to the team, about a year and some change, and he is our Vice President of Clinical and Outcomes Research. So Todd, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jason. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to connect with you all on this call today. I'm going to provide an overview of the purpose and impact of natural history studies and update you on the recent and ongoing initiatives we have in this important area. There are several reasons that the Foundation funds and conducts these studies. First, it's critical that we understand the natural progression of disease. In dealing with inherited retinal diseases, or IRDs, there are nearly 300 different conditions related to genetic variations. These studies help us to evaluate how a disease progresses, estimate the rate of disease progression, and how variable that progression is among groups of affected people. We also evaluate the usefulness of various outcome measures that help in designing future clinical trials for emerging therapies. An outcome measure is the result of a treatment or intervention that is used to objectively determine the baseline function of a patient at the beginning of the clinical trial. Once the treatment or intervention has commenced, the same measure can be used to determine progress and efficacy. The studies help us work with researchers to identify potential clinical trial participants in a confidential manner. In addition, we can make de-identified data from the studies accessible to researchers who can use it to design clinical trials. We also publish data from the studies in peer-reviewed publications that provide useful information for clinicians, patients, and other community members to better understand the diseases. Our ultimate goal is to boost and accelerate the development of therapies amongst both academic researchers and industry. Over the past 10 years, the Foundation has funded $17 million to conduct natural history studies in several prominent IRDs, including Stargardt disease, Usher syndrome, and retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. Let me provide a brief summary of these studies. In the ProgStar study, which was launched in 2013 and completed in 2017, we studied the progression of atrophy related to Stargardt disease, which is a major cause of early macular degeneration. This 2-year study prospectively followed 259 Stargardt disease patients and had a retrospective arm that enrolled 251 patients. To date, 22 study-related research papers have been published in peer-reviewed journals. For example, study results were recently published in the Journal of the American Medical Association's Ophthalmology online site. This study featured data that indicates that microperimetry may be a useful outcome measure for clinical trials of emerging Stargardt disease therapies. As many of you know, a microperimeter is a device that measures retinal sensitivity in the macula, the central region of the retina. Analyses of ProgStar data continue with several additional publications in progress. In the RUSH-2A study, which was launched in 2017 and completed enrollment in 2019, we are studying retinal degeneration caused by mutations in the USH2A gene. This genetic mutation is a leading cause of Usher syndrome type 2A and autosomal recessive RP. This is an international 4-year study designed to better understand the time course of vision loss in people with USH2A mutation. We completed enrollment in this study in mid-2019 with approximately 125 patients enrolled at 20 sites in the US, Canada, and Europe. We have been following these patients and have begun to compile data to share with the community. There are several scientific publications from the RUSH-2A baseline data that are in progress, and we will keep you informed on those results. In the PRO-EYE study, which was launched in late 2019 and is ongoing, we are studying retinal degeneration caused by a mutation in the EYS gene. The EYS gene is one of the more common causes of autosomal recessive RP. This is also an international 4-year study evaluating a variety of clinical measures with the goal of identifying those measures that are most useful to apply in future clinical trials to show if a therapy is working. We have identified 30 sites to participate. We began enrolling participants in February 2020. Currently, 6 sites have completed their certification requirements and 3 study participants are enrolled, and we have a target total of 100 patients to participate. As part of our current 5-year strategic plan, we have targeted the funding and initiation of at least 2 additional natural history studies in the next several years. At least one of these natural history studies will seek to identify useful clinical endpoints and characteristics that are common across multiple retinal diseases rather than a single disease focus. These studies require a significant undertaking by the investigators, reading centers, laboratories, genetics experts, and study participants who make this essential work possible, and we are truly grateful for these efforts. In order to approach these studies in the most effective manner possible, we established the Foundation Fighting Blindness Consortium in 2016. This international network of clinical researchers works together using common protocols and data sharing to undertake important clinical studies. The consortium currently consists of nearly 40 clinical centers of excellence around the world, including the US, Canada, the UK, France, Germany, Netherlands, Israel, Finland, and Poland. These centers have significant experience in IRDs and with standardized assessment protocols. The readiness and expertise of these centers help speed up the often lengthy and expensive process of setting up and conducting clinical studies. In February of this year, we hosted our first annual consortium meeting, which included participation by nearly 50 clinical trial investigators and coordinators from 9 countries. During the meeting, the investigators shared their data analyses on the RUSH-2A natural history study, discussed the ongoing PRO-EYE study, and discussed some future plans, including ideas for the next natural history study. In addition to these, we are planning other projects within our clinical research program, and we have interest from industry partners who share our strategic objectives. Some of the ideas under consideration are the following. We're interested in evaluations of patient-reported outcome measures in individuals with IRDs. These could be part of our registry or as a standalone project. Studies of the impact of IRDs on daily living, professional life, and use of healthcare resources. We're also interested in pursuing opportunities for affected individuals to participate in qualitative research. We believe these initiatives will have numerous benefits for the IRD community. Our team at the Foundation sincerely appreciates all that each of you are doing to help fund, research, prevent, treat, and potentially cure these blinding diseases. I'm now pleased to turn the call over to our CEO, Dr. Ben Yerxa.
Thank you, Todd. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our quarterly update call. I'm going to wrap up our formal remarks today by highlighting our key accomplishments in the fiscal year that just ended in June, which position us well for the coming year. So we kicked off the previous fiscal year with a broad-reaching strategic plan to provide $105 million in funding over 5 years for critical scientific projects. Our multi-year plan encompasses the full spectrum of funding programs from early translational research to clinical studies, the fundraising and revenue required to fund the highest levels possible, and the communications and education plans that allow us to be as connected as possible with our constituents. Our current portfolio of research projects includes approximately 80 grants conducted by research investigators at 75 institutions. In addition to funding researchers within the US, the funding extends internationally to laboratories in Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Canada, England, Finland, France, Germany, Israel, Italy, Mexico, the Netherlands, and Poland. So I'm pleased to share that despite the COVID pandemic, we're funding the entire portfolio of awards laid out in our plan for 2020. So let me give you a summary of our new funding commitments in fiscal 2020. We provided funding for individual investigators, including 6 preclinical and 2 clinical research awards, totaling $2.4 million. We are funding 3 aspiring clinician scientists interested in inherited retinal degenerations with 1-year clinical research fellowship awards, totaling $200,000 that will allow for post-residency clinical fellowships. The goal of this program is to increase the number of clinician scientists with expertise and commitment to provide clinical care to patients with inherited retinal degenerations. We're also providing $2.5 million over 5 years to the University of Pennsylvania Large Animal Model Translation and Research Center. This is the group who played a pivotal role in demonstrating safety and efficacy of the gene therapy Luxturna, and who are continuing to make similar contributions to other gene, cell, and small molecule therapies that are in or moving towards the clinic. We awarded $1.5 million to 3 research centers to develop new non-rodent large animal models for Stargardt disease, autosomal dominant retinitis pigmentosa, and Usher syndrome type 1B. These are a new category of awards introduced for the first time this year that form part of the increased funding anticipated in our 5-year strategic plan. These awards support the development of new animal models for diseases that lack appropriate models to support translation of research into the clinic. In addition, there is $6.5 million targeted for the new Translational Research Acceleration Program, aka TRAP, that will provide increased funding support for research that is very promising. The goal is to accelerate particularly promising therapies towards the clinic with increased funding and mentorship. This is a flexible program that supports academic researchers as well as small biotech companies where our funding can make a big impact. And finally, we are launching a call for applications to address early age-related macular degeneration research totaling up to $600,000. In selecting the recipients of these awards, we are guided by the review and input provided by our 50-member International Scientific Advisory Board, which is composed of leading researchers in inherited retinal diseases. Deploying a best-in-class governance model, the advisory board membership is structured with term limits to facilitate the addition of new and diverse members. In the past 2 years, we've added 17 new members, 9 of whom are women. We also created a subcommittee of the advisory board, the AMD Scientific Advisory Subcommittee, to address expanding needs of the Foundation's research portfolio in that area. Our research award programs are particularly focused on the global support of new researchers, novel technologies, and identifying new endpoints for clinical trials. We're also seeking therapies that go beyond treating the disease caused by a mutation in a single gene to develop single therapies that will treat multiple different genetic diseases, often referred to as pan-disease therapies. Our board of directors mandates that at least 25% of new awards are from investigators new to the foundation. We have consistently met this requirement and often exceeded the goal. Of the 15 new projects, nearly 50% are led by investigators new to the foundation, and more than 1/3 were awarded to researchers outside the US. You can find more information about these awards from our website homepage in the research section under the Scientific Grants and Awards Programs link. Another key part of the Foundation's opportunity to advance treatments for IRDs is our Retinal Degeneration Fund, what we call the RD Fund, which invests in companies with projects that can be in clinical testing within about 18 to 24 months. The fund is invested in multiple companies working on a range of promising technologies and therapeutic targets. Checked Up is a healthcare IT company that provides scientific and medical content to large screens and physicians waiting in exam rooms, and they've recently launched a new telemedicine platform in the midst of the pandemic. Nacuity just started a phase 2 clinical trial for a breakthrough treatment for RP associated with Usher syndrome in Australia. Nion Therapeutics is developing a mutation-agnostic therapy to treat inherited retinal diseases. ProCure, who you heard about last time on our call, has a phase 2 clinical program for Usher syndrome type 2A and is developing other treatments for severe genetic rare diseases such as Leber's congenital amaurosis number 10 and autosomal dominant RP. Sparing Vision is developing an emerging cross-cutting gene therapy designed to preserve cone photoreceptors, thereby saving vision in people with many forms of RP. Stargazer is wrapping up phase 1 clinical testing for an oral non-retinoid visual cycle modulator to treat Stargardt disease. Videre Bio is developing next-generation optogenetic gene therapies, which are pan-retinal approaches to restore vision in eyes with little to no remaining photoreceptors. And our most recent investment is with Atsena Therapeutics. Atsena is a startup gene therapy company coming out of the University of Florida in Shannon Boy's lab, and this was just announced yesterday. They're developing novel gene therapies for IRDs, including the phase 1/2 program for LCA1 that was licensed back from Sanofi and a preclinical Usher 1B program. We're now about 75% committed for our first fund. And I said first because we continue to experience high deal flow with many exciting opportunities that still need more capital. So I'm very excited to announce that based on the success of our initial fund, the RD Fund Board and the Foundation have approved an investment and fundraising plan for a second fund called RD Fund 2. We're also extremely grateful to have a foundational commitment of $15 million for the new fund from the Manning Family Foundation. This provides tremendous momentum for our second fund and will enable significant investments in groundbreaking programs. You can find more information online at rdfund.org. So the increase in gene and mutation-specific therapies entering the clinic, understanding the gene causing the disease in each patient has become more and more important. Over the past year, we've made remarkable progress expanding the MyRetina Tracker registry and the related open access genetic testing program, increasing the number of registry participants by more than 25% to 16,200 members currently. Last October, we launched a new nationwide program that allows any clinician able to diagnose an inherited retinal disease to order a free, comprehensive genetic test and genetic counseling for their patients. We now have genetic testing information provided by nearly 8,000 members, and our goal is to have 40,000 registry members by 2024, including more than 20,000 with genotype information available. So I'd like to wrap up by sharing several comments related to our Visions Conference. They really remind us why we're all working so hard to achieve our mission to drive the research leading to preventions, treatments, and cures for degenerative retinal diseases. One participant said, quote, "The mix and mingle was an amazingly helpful session, and I wish we could do something like this more often, and not just when the entire world is virtual. Attendees shared what apps are on their phones to help them with daily activities, and I think everyone really benefited from hearing that info," end quote. Another participant said, quote, "I love meeting other people who are going through what I am and understand my disease. When you connect with other visually impaired people at an event like this, it makes you realize you're not alone," end quote. She also said, quote, "I've been fundraising so long and I knew it was going toward research, but to actually learn and hear about what science is doing makes me feel so hopeful," end quote. So while there are clearly economic and healthcare challenges in today's COVID-impacted environment, we continue to have tremendous optimism for the breadth and potential of research happening across academia and industry. With your support, we are committed to keep the momentum going, and with continued robust expanded research funding and meaningful community engagement. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ben, and it is truly an exciting time for the Foundation to move into our 50th year as an organization. What we're going to do now is open the call to take your questions and comments. It is about 1:40 here on the East Coast, so we've got about 20 minutes reserved for Q&A, which is terrific. And I'm going to ask Chris to please provide the instructions for asking your questions again.
Sure. As a reminder, there are several methods for asking questions today. First, you may use and access the Q&A and chat features located at the bottom of the Zoom control bar and type in your question. Second, you can ask questions verbally. To do so, please raise your hand using the hand raising function on the menu bar at the bottom of the Zoom interface, and we will provide you with instructions to unmute yourself. And third, if you join by phone for today's call, you can press *9 to raise your hand. Pressing *6 will mute and unmute your line. You may also submit your questions via email at info@fightingblindness.org. Again, that is info@fightingblindness.org. Please note that if there are questions that we aren't able to answer on today's call due to time constraints, we will follow up with you directly via email over the next week or two.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris. And while we're compiling questions, I just want to take a moment and thank everyone again for participating today and remind you that there will be a transcript and audio recording of today's call on our website within the next week. And in addition, we would like to ask for your help. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many clinical trials and lab studies have either been delayed or been canceled, including those for sight-saving treatments and cures for retinal diseases. And there is new legislation that has been introduced to Congress to provide supplemental grants to federally funded research programs, including $15.5 billion with a B for projects at the National Institutes of Health and the National Eye Institute. Researchers need this funding to get critical projects back on track. And while Senate has agreed to these funding levels for supplemental funding, the House is yet to do so. And you can urge your House of Representatives to support these supplemental research grants by visiting the nonprofit website, www.researchamerica.org, under the Contact Congress page. And in less than a minute, you can send a letter to your representative and let them know how important this legislation is to all patients and families across our nation that are affected under the current situation. So with that, let's take our first question. Chris, what do we have to kick off our Q&A session?
Yeah, Jason, our first question ties into the comments you had earlier about the status of ongoing research. I'm going to throw this over to Todd, or even Jason, you can answer. Todd, can you comment on how COVID-19 is impacting clinical trials and your natural history studies?
Sure, thank you for the question. Certainly there has been an impact of the coronavirus on our clinical studies. There's a bit of a difference between when the pandemic began in March and where we are today. Early on, the research centers were quite restrictive in who they could see. Now we have seen a number of centers involved in our studies, and from information we've gathered participating in clinical trials, are able to see study participants again. Some still have some restrictions. The priority has been given to individuals who are participating in clinical trials of an interventional therapy, because there are important safety reasons why you need to be seen on time by your research physician. So those studies get priority. We are also seeing a number of our centers who are participating in our natural history studies are open and are enrolling patients in our PRO-I study, for example, that's open for enrollment. But not all centers are yet open. Sort of depends on where they are in the country and the status at their respective institutions. One thing I wanted to add about this too, that we've been sharing information amongst the investigators in our network. They've shared information about best practices, how to manage patient flow to keep a safe distance in their waiting rooms. We've gathered information from the manufacturers who make the equipment to do the imaging for the studies and shared those cleaning protocols across the network. So I'm quite reassured that our investigators are doing everything they can to make their facilities as safe as possible so that folks feel comfortable coming back in to participate in their research studies. Thank you for the question.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Todd. And thank you to everyone who's submitted questions so far. We will certainly get to many of these questions here on the call. However, to those questions that we don't get to, we will certainly follow up with each of you individually to make sure that all questions that are asked in this session get appropriate answers. The next question I'm going to direct to you, Brian. So Dr. Mansfield has joined us here for the Q&A session. Then at the end of the formal remarks, referenced all of the wonderful new grants and awards that were awarded as we ended fiscal year 2020. And the question is, so from the point in time when the grants are awarded to the time that they show up on the FFB website under the research section, what is taking place now, and when will the public find out about what those awards are, I guess, and when will that formal announcement take place?
Yes, thank you, Jason. That's a good question. There is always a delay between when our board votes to approve an award and when those awards appear in public, because there is a series of administrative steps that we need to go through after the award is approved. And this is where we reach out to the universities and we work with their contract officers to make sure that the conditions of the award are appropriate, that they agree to our terms on our financial reporting, on the way we request scientific updates to be provided on a regular basis. And so there's a little bit of paperwork that goes through that process. When that is finally completed across all of the sites that we have made awards to, then we publish the summaries of those awards out on our webpage for everyone to read about. So this can take 1 or 2 months, depending on the speed at which we need just to process the agreements, make sure everything is in place appropriately.
So today, everyone got a free preview before the information has been public, which is terrific, and we're happy to share, obviously. Thank you, Brian. I'm going to direct actually this next question again to you, Brian. Several questions around the announcement that Ben mentioned that we made back in October about, quote unquote, any ophthalmologist or eye care professional who can diagnose an IRD having access to now free genetic testing. And really, there's a couple questions I'm going to combine here, but really, if you could speak to the types of eye care professionals who can make a clinical diagnosis of an IRD, what that path might look like for a patient, and what that process might look like for ordering our free genetic testing through our program.
Yes, certainly. It's a good question too. So in the current program that we have, our open access genetic testing program, anyone who is clinically diagnosed with an inherited retinal disease who lives in the US is eligible for testing, as long as if they have not had a comprehensive gene panel test since 2016. So if you've had anything more than 32 genes that are related to an inherited retinal condition tested since 2016, you would not be eligible just yet because your testing is too new. But if you haven't had one for a while, then you're certainly eligible. The eligibility of clinicians who are able to order the test actually varies state by state. So if you are under the care of an ophthalmologist or a retinal specialist, then that is fairly straightforward. They are allowed to order a clinical diagnostic test through Blueprint. If you're under the care of an optometrist, it becomes slightly more complicated. Different states have different regulations about whether an optometrist may order a diagnostic test or not. So it really depends on, if you are under the care of an optometrist and you would like them to order the test, you really need to ask them if in your state they are allowed to order the test or not. It's only a small number of states that don't allow it, but again, the testing laboratory that runs the test has to respect the state regulations. So once you've determined if you're eligible to have the test taken, all you need to do is ask your clinician to order the test on your behalf. If they are not familiar how to do that, they can go to our webpage, fightingblindness.org, and under there, you will find a tab for genetic testing. If they click on that tab, there's information about it, but there are 2 downloads which are important. One is a PDF document for the person who is being tested, explaining what they will need to do and what the test will provide them with. And the other PDF is a download for the doctor, which tells them how to go about ordering the test from Blueprint Genetics. Now, it's important to remember that only a clinician can order the test on your behalf. So you're welcome to download that document for the clinician. In fact, you might even want to take it with you when you go for a visit to see them, to ask them to order the test. But you cannot order the test. It has to be done by a clinician. And again, these are regulations that the testing laboratory have to adhere to. So I hope that answers the question.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Brian. We've got a number of questions related to the impact of COVID-19 on our community, both as it relates to clinical trial enrollment and also whether or not there's any documented or initial overlap between the impact of COVID-19 specifically. I think the question is referencing from a pathophysiology standpoint on the IRD community. So perhaps, Todd, I think maybe you're probably best suited to speak of the impact of COVID-19 on, and you spoke to it a little bit ago, but the impact of COVID-19 on enrollment in clinical trials. And then I know the question came up yesterday about whether there's any mechanistic overlap between COVID and IRDs. And so maybe after Todd answers, I'll throw that part of the question to you.
Sure, I can add just a bit. The current state of play here, at least in the United States, is that some centers are open and conducting research as before, again, with some additional safeguards with respect to cleaning equipment and appropriate spacing or more distant spacing in the waiting room. Other centers around the world, say in Europe, are more like we were in the first of the year and don't have as many restrictions. So it really depends on where you are in participating in your particular clinical trial. But one message that I've heard many, many times is that all centers are being particularly careful to have appropriate distance and to reassure study participants that their environment is safe as possible.
Okay, very good. And Ben, do you want to speak to anything in the literature, anything in the scientific community as it relates to anything documenting an overlap between COVID-19 and direct impact on the IRD community?
Sorry, was that for me?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Ben. Yeah, I was addressing that to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that, to be honest with you. You know, we're all just trying to figure this out on the fly. Sorry, I don't have a good answer.
I know that question came up on another call yesterday, and it was sort of that's sort of the state of play, is that we're all trying to figure it out, and that I guess the short answer is that there's nothing that's been published to show that overlap, but you know, it's so new, it's hard to see where it's going, I guess. Brian, question around whether or not the free genetic testing program are only eligible to patients that are enrolling in trials supported by the Foundation Fighting Blindness. The answer is no. Of course, it's available to any patient that can be diagnosed by an IRD, diagnosed with an IRD by an eye care professional. But I don't know if you want to maybe speak to the role that genetic testing can help in accelerating folks getting enrolled in clinical trials. I know that question always comes up and has come up a couple of times today as well.
Yes, thank you, Jason. No, you're absolutely right. You do not need to be in a clinical trial to be eligible to have our open access genetic testing program. All you need to do is meet those conditions I mentioned previously and to have a clinician order the test for you, as long as if you live in the US. Now, unfortunately, we can't help people who are living outside of the US at the moment, although if your clinician contacts me, if you're outside the US, I may be able to help you gain access to discounted testing. But yes, clinical testing, genetic testing is really important these days because a lot of the therapies that are in the clinic or which are coming towards the clinic in the clinical pipeline are based around treatments for a specific gene. And when you look at some of the therapies, like that being developed by ProCure, they can be to a specific mutation within a specific gene. So it's increasingly important these days to understand the genetic cause of your disease, if you can, and that is what a genetic test will help you understand. I should, however, comment that while a lot of people are excited by genetic testing, there will be a group of people, currently about 50% of people, who go through a genetic test who will not get a clear explanation of the gene causing their disease. Now, these are people, often more likely people who have an autosomal recessive disease, like autosomal recessive RP, because the success rate of finding the genetic cause of disease varies a little by the mode of inheritance of the disease. But on the other hand, many people will get an informative result, and I think it's very important that if you don't know the genetic cause of your disease, that you seek out a genetic test. And moreover, when you do that, we'd really appreciate it if you join My Retina Tracker registry, if you're not already a member, and enter that information into the registry so that that information can help accelerate treatments and cures for all of us.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Maybe one follow-up question on genetic testing, and then a question for Todd on prevalence of the EYS gene. But Brian, first, the several questions, again, I'm trying to put into one theme here for you, which is around the advancements in accuracy or important information that is able to be identified out of genetic testing today, as compared to perhaps if someone had had a genetic test several years ago. And maybe you could speak a little bit to that, because I know some folks have been disappointed if they've had a genetic test many years ago because they didn't get the answers perhaps they were seeking, and how their expectations could be managed to what you could expect today with the advancements in the technology.
Yes, certainly. There are actually two aspects to that question. The first is that many people who were tested a while ago have expressed frustration to us at the Foundation about not ever hearing a clear result back. And the reason for that is that there are two different types of genetic testing that can be undertaken. And until we started our open access program, a lot of people were not receiving a test which would guarantee a result back. So let me explain the difference here. If you went for a genetic test and they did a test under what are called CLIA regulations, that's CLIA regulations, these are validated tests where it is agreed that if you don't find a cause of the disease, you may report, I have not found the cause of disease. If that happened, you were probably offered another genetic test, which would fall under the title of a research genetic test. Now, research genetic tests are done by individual researchers who have not had their tests approved by CLIA. And so while they will seek to find the genetic cause of your disease, they may not find it. It may be that your gene wasn't known and had yet to be discovered. But they couldn't actually tell you, we haven't got that information yet, because the tests are not approved. So many people ended up in an area where they were not hearing back and getting upset. And the reason was that your result from a CLIA test had not been useful, and the second test not being CLIA, the results generally could not be reported back to you. Now, the way to ensure that you always get a result back is to have a CLIA certified test. And in the open access program, and for those of you who are aware of our other program called the IRB program, both of those use a CLIA genetic test. And therefore, you will hear back whether we find a result or not. And you should hear back within about 4 to 6 weeks about the result. Now, the other reason that you may not get clarity on the genetic cause of disease comes into the subtlety of genetics. Genetics does not give a plus and minus result. You've got it, you haven't got it. It also has this third category of we're really not certain. So some differences between your gene and my gene may just be because we're different people. Some of them may be because I've got a disease and you don't, or because you've got a disease and I don't. And the challenge is to differentiate mutations that cause the difference just between you and me and our size, our skin color, our hair color, our height, our body weight, those sort of things, and those that cause disease. And these are called variants of uncertain significance. We just don't know the significance of that variation or that mutation. And so when you undertake a genetic test, you can sometimes get a test that says, yes, that mutation we definitely know causes a disease. Then you can get ones where we say, no, sorry, we're absolutely certain that's just because you and me are different. And then there are variants that we find which we just don't have enough information about at the moment that say, there's something different in this gene that could cause a disease, but we don't have enough information. We haven't seen this in enough people who have the disease to be able to say that this is definitively the cause of your disease. So sometimes you get this third category of uncertainty in a diagnosis. And this is why genetic counseling is really critical when you have a genetic test. And part of our open access genetic testing program is to provide you with a no-cost genetic counseling session. And in genetic counseling, a person who is experienced in the clinical presentation of disease and who also understands the complexity of genetics is going to look at your result and interpret it for you and explain to you in very simple language what I've been trying to shortly summarize so far. And so they will explain to you the limits of your test and the certainty of it. And they'll also tell you about therapeutic options, what clinical trials are relevant to you, what to look out for in the research literature. So the clinical counseling is really important to help you understand your test, and it will help explain these variations that you'll be getting in your genetic test reports.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian, for that detailed overview. It is just a minute after 2 o'clock, so we're going to take 2 final questions that I've got queued up here. One we'll direct to Todd, and then the final word we'll send to Ben. Todd, a couple folks have asked about the prevalence of the EYS mutation, specifically in the US, and I'm wondering if you could address that, and then we'll wrap up, Ben, with you speaking to a couple highlights that are happening in the world of Usher syndrome.
Yeah, I will just briefly respond and then ask Brian to supplement my response. The percent of patients with autosomal recessive RP accountable or attributable to mutations in the EYS gene ranges across the world from 7% on the low side to 24% on the high side in Japan. So there's quite a bit of geographic variation. The information I have in the study protocol doesn't reference a particular result in the US, but I believe Brian has some additional information that's not at my fingertips.
Yes, thank you, Todd. In the genetic testing study that is available to everyone, we've now undertaken about 7,500 genetic tests. And so we're starting to build some data about this. And I'm pleased to tell you that EYS is the 6th most common genetic cause of an inherited retinal disease that we have seen so far. So the most predominant disease that we find is Stargardt disease with ABCA4, and that's followed by the USH2A gene, and then the X-linked RP gene, RPGR, and then a form of autosomal dominant RP, PRPH2, followed by another autosomal dominant rhodopsin mutation, and then 6th in line is EYS. And currently our numbers suggest that of those who've been tested and had a clear diagnostic result, about 3% of them in the US have the EYS gene.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian. And then finally, Ben, can you just speak to a couple of highlights that are happening in the world of Usher syndrome as it relates to trials?
Yeah, in terms of actual clinical trials that are ongoing right now, as we mentioned, ProCure has an Usher's 2A trial that's ongoing right now, but it's specifically for exon 13 mutations. So it's a subset of Usher's 2A. And then Nacuity just started a phase 1/2 trial in Australia in broad Ushers with RP. So those are the 2 I'm aware of right now, and there's certainly several in the preclinical pipeline. So stay tuned over the next year or so.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ben. And it is about 5 minutes after 2 here on the East Coast, so we're going to wrap things up. I do want to say thank you to all of our participants on today's call. And for anyone who asked a question that we weren't able to get to live on today's call, as I mentioned earlier, we will follow up with you via email over the next couple of weeks. And if there's any other information that you need or any other questions or suggestions that you have, please feel free to email us at info@fightingblindness.org. And just to repeat a couple of the other websites, of course, our foundation website is www.fightingblindness.org. We referenced the RD Fund several times in this call. The RD Fund website is rdfund.org. And again, we really appreciate everyone's engagement throughout the call and look forward to our next Insights Forum call. We also will be providing updates via email to all of these events that are upcoming that we spoke about earlier in the call, so please stay tuned for those. And we will be again in touch really soon. So thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of the day. That concludes today's call.